The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to LogRhythm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, LogRhythm provides security made smarter.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Join us April 1st to 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019. Visit infosecworld.misty.com/security-weekly and use the registration code OS19-SecWeek for 15% off the main conference or World Pass. We have a number of interviews scheduled with confirmed speakers across all of our shows. Tune in to learn more about topics that will be covered at the conference. Also, we will be recording at InfoSec World 2019. If you are interested in booking an interview or briefing with the Security Weekly team, please visit securityweekly.com/conference requests to learn more. And one of those guest speakers at InfoSec World is Brendan Goodwin. Brendan joined Arthur J. Gallagher Company in 2014 as Regional Cyber Director. Prior to Gallagher, Brendan was at AIG, where he was the East Coast Cyber Specialist, responsible for the Cyber Edge product offering. Brendan will be presenting at InfoSec World 2019 on how cyber insurance can augment your cyber security strategy. Brendan, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so when I went through the list of InfoSec World speakers, we agreed with InfoSec World to interview 8 of the speakers, kind of 2 on each of our main enterprise shows. And when I saw this topic on cyber insurance, I said, I need to bring you on to Business Security Weekly because I think a lot of people need to really understand what cyber insurance is, what it covers, what it doesn't cover. So I said, let's bring you on. Let's have a conversation about cyber insurance and kind of educate, a lot of our senior security audience on what it is, what it isn't. So I'm glad that you could join us.
I agree. It's certainly a topic of conversation that people are very interested in.
Yeah. So let's start with the problem. I always like to start with the problem. I think a lot of people are confused about cyber insurance. I think there's a lot of confusion about who owns cyber insurance. Is it the CISO? Is it the risk group? Is it the CFO? Is it somebody else? I mean, help us kind of lay out what's going on with cyber insurance. How is it looked at within organizations? And what's this dynamic between finance and risk and security?
So what we see with most clients and prospects when we bring up the subject initially is IT is oftentimes removed from the conversation. It's more of a risk management discussion, and some that may fall in underneath the CFO or CEO with respects to the org chart there. The IT department, though, absolutely should be a part of any conversation regarding cyber insurance. Obviously, the biggest purpose of the insurance is to protect the IT infrastructure. So why wouldn't you have them involved in the conversation from the beginning?
Right. And so does this create a little bit of friction between IT and security and the other executives? Because they're like, well, wait, you're buying cyber insurance, but I'm responsible for managing aspects of the cyber risk from a security perspective. Does it create some friction there?
Sometimes it does. We are getting to a point where we don't see it as often as we used to, but it's still there. And really, the main thing that we like to discuss when we're talking with that and when we see that friction coming about is we talk with the IT team and say, listen, we understand that you do have great policies, procedures, and processes in place. However, the biggest vulnerability for a company is not the IT infrastructure, it's the employees who operate on that IT infrastructure. And the lack of training or the human element of that really does bring to light the fact that the best IT team in the world can still be vulnerable because of the employees and how that gets exposed.
Right. So if I'm a CISO and I'm looking at, cyber insurance, what do I need to know? Because I don't know. There's a lot of different policies out there. There's policies that are tied more to general liability. Then there's cyber riders on top of that. But I think it's really confusing to think about how cyber insurance fits into this overall kind of insurance structure first, but then what are the different things that are included, not included, covered, not covered? I'd like to kind of break down and educate the audience a little bit about cyber policies in general.
Sure. So the first thing is, you're right. There are a lot of different policies out there that may have some kind of response to a cyber event. Cyber insurance is sort of a misnomer. It really, the crux of it is a privacy and security policy. It's for violations of security that lead to financial loss for a company, for example, whether it's the first party or third party company, or the violations of privacy regulations. So there are several different components to a cybersecurity policy. The first would be the liability section. So that would be in the event that a company is sued by another organization or by a group of individuals for failure to keep information private, whether that's corporate confidential information or personal information. The other area where is also the failure to protect your network and failure to keep your network secure. A great example of this would be if you're a vendor and a hacker were able to infiltrate your system and use that to get to a bigger fish. That bigger fish sues the vendor, and now for the lack of their security controls, and that leads to a lawsuit. That coverage would be there. There's also coverage underneath that section for regulatory fines and penalties. I do have to add the caveat where insurable by law. There are certain jurisdictions that do not allow for insurance policies to pay for fines and penalties. And as a result, that would prohibit the policy from paying. Another coverage section would be our breach response there's a few different terms for it, but the breach response is the most commonly used. And that's in the event you have a breach and you have to have first party costs to address it. So, the breach occurs, you have a forensics firm that comes in and investigates the scope of the breach. That leads then oftentimes to notifying individuals that were impacted by it. If a breach impacts or compromises social security numbers, then that would be a reason to have to notify individuals that their social security numbers were compromised. So the forensics firm will help determine the full scope of what the breach was. So that way we're not notifying in different waves. We want to make sure any notification process is a one-time deal. We don't want to have to go back after the consumers or employees and let them know that there is more that we are uncovering. The other area underneath here would be identity and credit monitoring. All 50 states have different data privacy regulations that you have to adhere to. And so within those regulations would have minimum requirements of ID and credit monitoring. And lastly, the legal aspect to this as well, the legal costs. Applying each of those 50 different state laws obviously comes with a cost. And so having an expert who is very familiar with each of those state laws to apply them is of utmost importance. Another coverage section would be the cyber extortion or ransomware. Very simply, if you have a ransomware event going on in your network, it will pay for the forensics to determine the full scope of what they have access to. And they will also pay any potential extortion demand that's out there. Lastly is your business interruption side. So this would be coverage that would be available in the event you have your network impaired for an extended period of time, and that leads to a loss of revenue. That loss of revenue can be picked up by the business income piece of the cyber insurance policies.
All right, so lots of
to
different
address your
components.
question about, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say there's lots of different components here.
There are.
So if I'm thinking about it from the company's perspective, do I get them all? How do I decide what fits into my overall strategy from a security perspective? Do I just say, look, I need them all, regardless of the fact, or are there reasons why you would pick and choose certain coverages?
Well, so the majority of the policies are purchased as the bundle of all of them. Do have a few instances where, for example, a client would purchase just the liability section to comply with the contract that they're entering into. But the majority of the time, it is the entire product suite. There are a few clients that would opt not to buy the business interruption piece. They feel as though that they live in a world where they would get paid regardless of the interruption if the outage occurring for an extended period of time, mainly because those same clients would have to owe them the money regardless. A perfect example of this would be a university with the tuition side of business, where the tuition is still due regardless. We, of course, remind them of the fact of all the different shops that they have on campus and how that could be a different time element.
Got it. And so, what impact, if any, to your cybersecurity program does cyber insurance now impact, right? If you decide you're going to go out and get a cyber insurance policy, and these are all the different sections that are part of it, and remember, all these are like post activity, right? None of this is preventative. This is all on the it's already happened side. So what adjustments, if any, do security professionals look at in their security program when cyber insurance is in play, or don't they make any changes?
Well, first, a lot of these carriers now are offering preventative services with the purchase of the cyber insurance policy. So each of those coverage sections that I mentioned would trigger in the event of a breach. However, there are carriers who are offering pre-breach services to help prevent breaches from occurring because it's in everyone's best interest to do so, including the carrier. One such offering that we're seeing from a few different carriers would be a tabletop exercise where you can get all the interested parties from the company or the client in the room and run through a mock breach scenario. And really to make sure that the business continuity plan and the incident response plan do not have any holes in it. So that way, when you do have a live breach, you're in a scenario where everyone can respond appropriately and that we're not finding out that it relies upon information from someone who is off-site and not able to be touched.
Got it. And then you said there's also some product offerings on the preventative side that could also augment what you're doing in your normal security practice also.
That's correct, yes. They do have, for example, penetration testing is something that some of the companies do, or vulnerability scans. They will offer those kind of relationships. The other important thing that I think is overlooked sometimes when it talks about cyber insurance is when that breach occurs, oftentimes companies do not have prearranged relationships with forensics firms or legal counsel that specialize in data privacy. And so this is an avenue that you can get access to negotiated rates that the carriers have, with each of those expert vendors. So that way, in the event of a breach, you're not now searching around who should we even bring in. That is already something that is pre-negotiated at the time of purchase of the policy.
Oh, that's nice. So now if you're kind of getting ready, if you're a smaller organization and you're starting to build out more maturity in your security program, cyber insurance providers can augment aspects of both preventative through some activities, but also on the response forensic side to really give you some of the resources you might need later without you trying to do it all on your own.
That's correct. And so you have, sometimes it's software, sometimes it's hardware, and then it's just, some other times it's just policies and procedures. None of the carriers are requiring companies or insureds to be using it. It is simply an offering to try to see if there's a way to help augment the cybersecurity department at the client to make sure that they're doing everything they can to prevent that breach from occurring, because obviously the insurance carriers do not want to be paying for that breach as much as the client doesn't want to have that breach occur either.
Right. Are there some prerequisites that the organization has to be prepared for to apply for a cyber insurance policy? Are there certain controls that are expected? Are there certain certain data they need to know. Kind of walk me through maybe a little bit about kind of the application process and what that looks like, just to prepare some of our viewers who might be looking for these policies.
Well, it depends on each carrier. They each have their own application. However, they are accepting each other's applications at the time of a purchase. For example, if we were to complete one carrier, we can go to multiple carriers, and they oftentimes would accept that. The information that's required, from a security standpoint, it's relatively basic information that your CISO or IT head would be able to answer. For example, antivirus protection, what type of antivirus do you use? Firewalls. Do you use multi-factor authentication? Those are not, multi-factor authentication is not necessarily a requirement to get coverage, but it certainly helps get the broadest and best terms possible. They also ask questions along the lines of whether or not you have an incident response plan or business continuity plan. And if you don't, they do have samples that you can use to implement one that would help out augment your protocols.
Good. Yeah. I knew, because I've done a little bit of research on this, and I knew that all the applications were different. Some providers go a lot deeper into additional security controls, because I think that influences the premium. The more controls you have in place, it actually helps you, I think, on the premium side. But I've also seen some that are pretty basic that don't go into that much depth at all. That's why I was curious, kind of where's that right balance for organizations that want to fill out the application.
Well, for our clients that do have robust cybersecurity practices, we do like to have them highlight that. So we would either use that longer form one that you mentioned, or another way that we do it is we oftentimes will have a conference call where we'll have the CISO get on the call or a meeting with the different underwriters to kind of tout the processes that they have in place, the security measures. So that way they can then use that as an opportunity to show how great of an IT team they have, and that helps out with the coverages and the premiums associated with it.
Good. Yeah, good advice. Can you give us some examples of cyber insurance kind of coverages? Kind of just walk us through how do these things kind of actually work in reality when some of these events happen? Can you give us a couple examples?
Well, the most common one we see right now is a ransomware event. So when a client of ours is aware of a ransomware event, the policies come with a 24/7 hotline that gets you into the carrier. And so what we would want our client to do is call that hotline as soon as possible. They will then hire a breach coach. That breach coach is most oftentimes an outside law firm. And they kind of act as the quarterback on that breach. Or the ransomware event. They'll bring in the appropriate vendors, whether it's a forensics firm or in the event of a scenario where you also have to notify individuals, they'll bring in the notification firms. But the way we want them to operate is because when it's hired by an attorney, they keep the attorney-client privilege in place. If the company were to go direct to that forensics firm and hire them, that could lead to more information being discovered about that if there was a potential lawsuit down the road. With respects to a scenario where there's a compromise of confidential information, most commonly used would be social security numbers. If there's a breach that we know that someone who had unauthorized access to those social security numbers, and we have to notify pursuant to the state laws, again, we would use that 24/7 hotline that the policies provide. They will again hire that quarterbacks coach, and then that law firm, that breach coach would sit there and apply to different state laws and make sure that we are adherent to each of the different state laws. Some of them have a time element associated with it that has to be reported to the state attorney general. And so they want to make sure that we are following every step in the process, because that oftentimes, if you do not, will lead to potential litigation or regulatory fines and penalties.
I think that's great advice. So if somebody doesn't have a policy today, where do they start?
So that's a good question. And it really is just talking internally with that C-suite team. Whether it's the risk manager who helps purchase the purchases insurance currently, or if it's sometimes we see some of our clients or they don't have a risk manager and it's a CFO or a treasurer, whoever that individual within the organization who who headlines the team that purchases the insurance, one, they should be discussing this internally. The other area that we say is the CISO and the IT team should be bringing it up to their the individual within the organization who does purchase it. And the reason being, again, we realize, and it's the way the world is now. It's not an indictment on the IT infrastructure that they are coming forward and saying we need this cyber insurance. It really does augment their defense that's out there. And there's a way to certainly go about it and having that internal conversation that, the employees are what scare you, or your vendors as well. And that's what's leading to most breaches is vendor access, as well as the employees who, for example, when they get up to go use the restroom, leave their computer on and their screen on with confidential information on their screen.
Right. Yeah, great. I mean, and then once they decide that they want to move forward with the insurance, if they've got an existing carrier, obviously they should probably go there first. But if they don't, then where would they find a good list of providers for cyber insurance policies?
Well, if they do have an insurance broker, that would be the first conversation that I would say. Each of the cyber insurance does. There are very few, if any, carriers that would be doing it direct with the client. They would want to have a broker involved, and that's really to the benefit of the client as well. The reason being there are multiple policies out there, and to make sure that their policy is the appropriate one for them and really addresses their needs. That's what brokers do. So either contact their current insurance broker, or certainly different insurance brokers have a lot of advertising out there on their websites, and if you just did a quick search of cyber insurance broker, you get quite a bit of a return online.
All right, that's very good. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you very much for having me.
If anyone wants to see Brendan's session, he will be presenting at InfoSec World 2019 on Wednesday, April 3rd at 9:30 a.m. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.